Joining me now is CTV News public safety analyst and former OPP Commissioner Chris Lewis. Chris, thanks for joining us today. So the inquiry won't hear from Doug Ford directly, but that readout we just shared does offer some insight into the federal and provincial response. I wanted to ask you about the Prime Minister's assertion that the police shouldn't need more legal tools to clear the Ambassador Bridge blockade. Did the police have everything they needed at that time?
Well, they did. And in fact, they cleared that blockade without the Emergencies Act because it didn't come into effect until the day after they cleared it. And so what they needed in Windsor was a plan. And they had a plan put together. They needed enough resources. The OPP provided that and some other departments as well. And they executed the plan. And so, you know, the commissioner of the OPP and many other people that were involved from a leadership perspective at the time all said we didn't need more legislation. It helped without a doubt, but we didn't need it. We had existing powers under existing laws. We just needed to get the people in place to do it, and that's what happened.
Now, we've also seen this very clear comparison between the police response in Ottawa and the one in Windsor. Was it simply a case that all other police forces learned from Ottawa's mistakes?
Well, for sure. I mean, we always learn from one another, the good and the bad, and sometimes the ugly in terms of major incidents, big investigations, protests, etc. There's always that dialogue and the debriefing process among those involved. But in the case of watching what went down in Ottawa, which in fairness was way different and way more complex with 500 plus trucks in the downtown core, rather than what occurred in Windsor. Windsor wasn't easy either. It had its certain nuances that made it difficult, but it was done first, and then all those resources and many more went to Ottawa, of course, and subsequently reacted and did what was necessary in Ottawa. They didn't have enough resources at the front end, and frankly, they didn't have a good plan at the front end to try and stop that thing from becoming entrenched. So all the stars aligned. Once Windsor was done, Coutts, Alberta was done. They got all the resources from the RCMP and OPP in Ottawa. They had a proper plan that was developed by a joint team of police leaders and experts in their field, and they executed the plan. That would have happened regardless of the Emergencies Act, but the Emergencies Act certainly helped in terms of towing and a few other details.
I wanted to ask you about that specific poll and just a quick precision here. I wanted to make sure that people understand that it said 2 out of 3, or sort of 2/3 of Canadians believed that the Emergencies Act was necessary. What do you think about that public perception?
Well, the public perception is what it is. And the general public wouldn't understand why wasn't there enough police there to handle this in the front end. Well, that was an Ottawa police decision around trying to get enough resources in, what they needed based on their assessment that the protest wasn't going to be around for a few days, more than a few days. Well, we all know now that was never the intention, and they became deeply entrenched in the city. So when the resources all finally showed in Ottawa to deal with a proper plan, the general public assumes that came as a result of the Emergencies Act. The law came into effect. All of a sudden, there's thousands of police officers there, and they fixed the situation. So they're confusing the two, and I don't blame them. It makes sense that they would think that way. But the reality is those officers were all on the way, should have been there weeks prior, but the planning wasn't done properly, and mistakes were made, and so be it. They always are, and I've made many mistakes in operational leadership roles as well. So not to throw stones, but that's the reality. But the general person out there that voted wouldn't understand all those little nuances.
Former Ontario Provincial Police Commissioner and CTV public safety analyst Chris Lewis. Thanks so much for joining us, Chris.